Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast.
Before we get into today's conversation, Canada Growth Network. Here's the math. A full CRM, email marketing, funnels, and automations for less than a coffee a day. That's $47 a month Canadian with a $1 trial to start. If you're building a business and still duct taping tools together, check the link in the show notes.
It really is a privilege to be speaking to the Canada Growth Network. I really appreciate that opportunity. So, of course, we're going to be talking a little bit about why growing businesses become harder to run. But, this is going to be a talk. It's not a presentation, but it helps to have something to guide the conversation so that we don't take a trip off into different directions. But the reality is that what I'm going to endeavor to do today is challenge the way you think. So let's start here. What has become harder for you to manage as your business has grown? Since your business has grown, what has become harder to manage? So generally speaking, when I talk to my clients, they talk about things like time or being free to do other things. Cash flow definitely is that, margins. And it's interesting how sometimes it may seem like it's one thing, but it may be a combination of several things. The reality is that when businesses become harder to run, that happens usually before the profitability starts to decline. You start to feel it. And as I will say to anyone that I'm talking to, when they start to talk about things like, I just don't seem to have enough time, things feel tight, they're already losing their predictable performance because growth it creates more customers. Most of the time, that's what we want. Growth will create more decisions that you have to make. And then growth will create more moving parts. And guess what? As someone has said, if you don't necessarily have the systems or processes in place, they actually do compound and makes life quite a challenge. But growth doesn't create those problems. What happens is growth reveals them. And this is something that we can get confused about. Because I think all of us want business to grow. And, we talk about sometimes having a block. You're afraid of success because you think that it's going to get harder. But no, what happens is all along there are things that's in practice, ways of doing things, ways of thinking that actually are already existing. And quite frankly, they're just existing, living unchecked. And ultimately, when you get more business, then it starts to show up. Because what isn't corrected, what isn't challenged, persists. So what's some early warning signs that, long before numbers started to move, profitability, margins drop, sometimes it shows up with factors like people not showing up for work. Long before that starts to happen, the system starts signaling. So think about this. If you happen to have a team, the decisions are coming back to the owner. Nothing moves unless it's checked with the owner. Now, when I'm working with someone, I might say to the owner, if you segment your customers, you may have a tier of customers that you're going to deal with. Generally speaking, they're the ones that's contributing significantly to your revenue growth. But at the end of the day, if everything is coming back to the owner, that's a big signal. The other thing is this whole play between revenue and profitability. So revenue is growing. That really feels good. You see these big numbers that's showing up that says, man, our sales team is really moving. We're really closing these sales. And then at the end of the month or whenever you close your books, you find that guess what? Your profitability is a shade of what you thought was going to happen. The other thing is everyone is busy. Yet nothing seems to get done. And that is probably worse than anything because you can really burn out a team. You can burn yourself out because you don't see any ROI on your efforts. Teams fix today and creates tomorrow's problems. Now, this can be very subtle because sometimes what happens is is when you have really good people in your organization, there can be challenges in the operation and they solve for those problems. They solve for them. We get used to them, but tomorrow it becomes a problem because what happens is you don't have one operating system. You have an operating system for every brilliant person that has an idea of how to work around and get things done. Now, that can be kind of like, if you want to have an entrepreneurial spirit in your business, that's fantastic. You want people to bring that kind of creativity. But by the same token, you will want to avoid having 10 or 15 different ways of doing things that really can affect the outcome, the results that you bring to your customers, the level of the customer experience they get, the quality of the products you produce, and ultimately how quickly you get the right things done in your business. And then small interruptions. I mean, really small things. And you find yourself asking, why is it? Why is it this keeps coming? And so why can't someone else? I think someone else has the capacity to deal with this. Why isn't that happening? And the problem is that they're not isolated. They come. And over time, what happens is you start to see them as signals and it becomes a pattern in the business that we need to observe. So ideally, one business moving in one direction is really, really focused on different areas of responsibility. So you see here where you're talking about customers are one, value is delivered to the customer, you generate profit, people get led, and the work is organized. And as the business grows, what happens is these areas start to affect each other more and more. Now, as a solo entrepreneur, you might be able to move kind of seamlessly through these. But as the business grows and you start realizing you need different resources, other resources, and different parts that's involved in these activities start to thinking about what they need to do in order to deliver these areas of responsibilities, then they start to collide. So predictable performance comes from aligning these parts towards one business outcome. It's not growth, it's what growth reveals in your existing system. So I call those 5 areas capabilities that exist in one business. And it's very active. And when you see these, it's 5 boxes, but it's everything that goes in each one of those circles. When customers, you're talking about things like the customer journey, you may have the marketing, what you're doing might be the sales, but all of that is happening depending upon your business model and they're operating on an objective. By the same token, you have delivering value. What does that mean? If you're manufacturing, you know what that means. High quality products on time, throughput is smooth. You make a commitment to a customer and that product is sitting on their docks when they want it. Organizing work. If you have a manufacturing operation, is it a line manufacturing setup, or is it some other design? Or if you're doing I have another service-based industry, how is that work organized to be sure you achieve the objective, the desired outcome for your customer? In the meantime, that the way you work is consistent and clear. So it doesn't become a new experience every time you get a new client. And of course, you're leading people, and leading people is certainly more than simply saying you go do. If you really want to have an organization that is functioning well together, this leadership component can be huge. It's the decisions you make, it's how you engage people around the work that needs to happen. It's your ability to listen to them and to unleash their power, and that power, their ability to think and to be creative and do it in such a way that they get to bring the best to the table in a process that really supports the business objective. And ultimately, that all ends up in generating greater profits. So these are the 5 capabilities that I deal with on an ongoing basis with my clients. So let's talk about, I think the best way to talk about how my business shows up and how it supports small business is to talk through some examples. And so what I'm going to share with you now is 2 examples that I think really represent the heart of the challenges that we've been talking about. So some of you probably have heard me talk about the woman who came up one day and said, look, I made $1 million and I only kept $25,000 in profits. And that's a true story. I had gone to an event, a speaking event, and I'd been on stage, and after we came off, we had wrapped up, and I was in the lobby talking to some people, and I heard these footfalls coming up really, really fast. And so I turned around, and there in front of me was a woman who said, I really, really had to talk to you. After I heard you on stage, listen, I need to have more customers. I need to close more sales. And if you can't do that for me, it's no need of me talking. I said, well, tell me more. And that's when she said, I made $1 million last year and I only took home $25,000. And I said, ooh, well, that was a big change. And so I asked her a couple of questions, and we ended ultimately spending some time together to kind of work through what was happening. Now, there were several things that was going on in her business, but for the purpose of this conversation, I want to narrow it down. It was a translation company. It's a services company. She had 4 people working in the business, herself and 3 other people. One was an administrative, and then she had 2 translators. And so they had a very brisk business here in Switzerland in the area. With the NGO community, there's a lot of work that happens in that space as they actually do translations to deliver training or other activities that they have to deploy to, different countries in the missions of some of these NGOs. There is quite a collection of multinationals here. And if anyone in the US, for example, is preparing information that needs to go out to their global community and it comes here to Switzerland and they do it in French, actually that has to be given to a local translator to make sure that the translation that has been used really serves that local workforce. It has to be in the local language, and it does not translate point by point. And I've seen that happen time and time again, and it really erodes the employee engagement and the understanding of the local team when things just are not communicated in a way that really fits with their culture and their understanding. So this was not a small operation for 4 people. So they were quite busy. But the challenge was that despite how much they were bringing in, revenue was not becoming profit. That it was a huge drop that you can see just, without any knowledge. And the answer wasn't growth. It really was not getting more customers. Not to say more customers would not have been wonderful, but for this particular situation, it was really not what was happening. What really was happening is there was a lack of commercial operating discipline. And what I mean by that is the realized value of the work just didn't happen. So, for example, new customer come in because there was no standard approach in the way they intook customers, the way they set up their offers and how they approach their individual offers, their pricing strategy. Everything was a new adventure. So someone would come in and they would have a project that needed to be done, and it was going to take 100 to 200 hours. It might be undercharged, or they may have another project that came in and it had scope creep, additional work that was being done beyond the scope of the standard, the standard of the statement of work, and ultimately they basically was leaving that money on the table. In fact, one project, one that I looked at, they had lost 10K on that one project for out of scope work. Okay. And so sometimes it's missed money, sometimes it's money that's never earned. But ultimately, when you have ongoing expenses and other things that's dipping into the revenues that you're generating, and you're either missing money or losing money, ultimately you end up where this client landed. The ultimate result, and once we got in and we created some commercial discipline, one, we also worked on how she paid her team, because she was asking people, what do you want? So someone would come in, I want X. Someone else would come in and say, I want X. And so actually, even in paying her team, there were big discrepancies that were not aligned to the market. We had to bring discipline even in that area. And also to help that owner to understand that operational discipline needed to come from her and from her leadership. So there was even some mindset work. Ultimately, with the changes that we made with her, we came up with on the average between $5,000 and $7,000 per engagement, improved performance from a income, from a revenue generation perspective, which ultimately dropped to the bottom line. Now, in terms of how she was paying the people, that was actually addressed over time, because once you give money, once you pay people money, you generally don't take that money back. It becomes a fixed cost for your business. So as people left the organization, then she normalized the compensation so that it was more in line with the market. So I made $1 million and took home $25,000, gradually changed. We found about 50K in the first 6 months. And the last conversation I've had, because, once you're my customer, you're always my customer. The last conversation, when I spoke to her, she says, thank God I found you. So that was pay enough. Now, the next example is I want the business to run without me. So this owner, actually, he had inherited his business. His father started the business, and he inherited after his father's death. He continued to run it, and he had actually grown it to a $5 million revenue business. And he had 20 employees, and he had actually built culture around care, not a real hierarchical type leader. He liked the way they solved problems as a team. Something would come up, he just meet with the team and says, I've got this problem, how are we going to solve it? But there was some challenges with that approach because that business was very owner dependent. And when I say owner dependent, what I mean is this. When he left, important things didn't get done, sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. The other thing that happened is there was a lot living in his brain cells. So he would come in and he would look on a shelf out in the shop and he would see that there would be a component or a piece of equipment or something, and he would see it out on the shop floor. But he knew he had that same component or equipment somewhere, usually in his garage at his home. And he would look and he would see it on the shelf and he said, what is that doing there? And so one employee said, well, we needed it. So we just went over to the do-it-yourself store and we picked it up. And so that was a duplicate purchase of something that was already there, that was somewhere that the owner happened to know it was. The other thing is that sometimes he would kind of noodle things. So in this business, he had these 20 employees and people were being compensated based upon their ability to negotiate. And he had one person who had negotiated the highest salary in the place because he did a lot. That was his logic. He did a lot. And one day he was observed for over 3 hours to be on his smartphone scrolling. He was observed on the camera. Okay. And so when he was approached by the office manager about a special program that needed to be done, the first thing the young man said was, well, we're going to need overtime to do that. It's going to require a lot of overtime. But because she had observed him scrolling on his smartphone, by the way, over multiple days, it was something like a whole work day, she was able to say, well, no, I think you have the time, and let's arrange your work schedule accordingly. So it was those kinds of things. And the owner, nothing was necessarily happening because people were relying on the owner to show up and make these decisions. Now, one of the things that was a big breakthrough was that we protected a little over 1,000 a day in revenue streams. So part of the process, part of the work that I did with them, besides some other things around structure and organization and right roles and responsibilities in place is I went through every revenue stream to understand its margins and performance. And they had one revenue stream that seemed like it actually produced about 40% of the revenue, very high revenue, but it also had a huge concentration of labor. In fact, almost 2/3 of the labor was in that one operation. That presented one opportunity. But the real opportunity was this. They had one stream and they had one worker that worked that particular operation. And when he was away on vacation or he was sick, the operation didn't run. His logic was it wasn't a lot of flow that went through, but what they weren't looking at is for that one operator and one operation, it was generating a heck of a margin for the business. It was far more profitable than the one that was producing 40% of the revenue when it run. And when the equipment broke down, it was sick. So it's two things happening. When the person was away, it didn't run. And if equipment broke down, it didn't run. And just on that operation, they lose 1,000 a day. So when we were able to look and see that dynamic, we shut that down. And that tight feeling that that owner was telling me, things just feel a little tight. He was able, without adding anybody, but simply through cross-training another person and having a backup and putting in a preventive maintenance scheme so that these type of critical components didn't break and the equipment set down, made a huge difference in the performance of that business. The result was that we were able to protect the revenue. The business became more resilient. And what was so good is this owner actually took that analysis and he took it to the team and he showed them how their particular contribution in those revenue streams would make a difference for the business, for the growth and the stability. And one day the owner, when we were doing our regular follow-up, we had a conversation and he said, you know what? I've been away 2 weeks. He says, when I come back, everybody's working. He said, I don't know whether I like that because he was so used to being the center of attention. And he said, that feels strange. He said, nobody's waiting for me to be there. And so he actually achieved what he wanted to achieve. And he ultimately settled out and he felt good about the outcome. But that also shows how much this owner dependence can be a function of how the owner, him or herself, is thinking. So we have both businesses and they had the same things in common. Owner focused on symptoms, the business revealed the problems, and then small improvements compounded into large results. You notice I didn't talk about everything. We didn't do everything. We didn't try to do everything. We tried to focus on 2 or 3 things that were really going to move the business forward, improve that performance, improve the profitability in incremental amounts that would compound and it would add up to something big. Profit always follows performance and performance always follows capability. Those 5 areas are essential areas for running a successful business. You really want to make sure that that performance in those areas are as high as they can be. And sometimes it's just not enough time for that owner or founder, or even if they have fractional staff, to really get into those details. And that's where someone like me comes in and can help do that for them and actually come in and do the diagnosis and help them prioritize. And then in some cases, actually execute some things to really make a difference in how they're performing. So now, what might what you're doing, your business, be telling you about what's going on? What's making it harder? If you think about what's in your business that your business is trying to tell you every day when you wake up and you're thinking about what's ahead of you, and you're facing with a little bit of dread, just tuck it away. And when you get a moment, think a little bit more about it, because at the end of the day, it's not about the diagnostics. It's not about a framework. It's not about a tool. The whole idea is to help owners and founders and leadership teams to bring the enjoyment back into leading their business. And you bring it back by doing those capabilities well that drive the performance and drive the profitability. And to help owners and founders and leadership teams to do that, I have the Profit Pulse Snapshot. And that's a complementary next step. And it's about continuing the conversation. So if you realize in those moments of reflection that we've had that, yeah, there are some things that's making my business harder to run than it needs to be, the Profit Plus Snapshot can help you, because what it does is you can come with one issue and plug it in to this app, and it'll look at the impact, it'll look at what it would take for you to really address it and give you strategic starting points. And it is a real result that can help you really start seeing your business differently, because it says these are places where you can look. So with that, I'm Fran Strickland. Here on the screen are some QR codes for LinkedIn and for you to download the Profit Pulse Snapshot. And it's my absolute pleasure to be with you. And I hope that you're able to walk away with something that tweaks the way you've been thinking about your business. Thank you.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.